just go down below. Says I'm doubling the rent cause the building's condemned. You're gonna help me buy City Hall. But we can, you know we can. But we can, you know we can. Let's fix a landlord man. I tell him turn on the water, I tell him turn on the heat. Tell me all you ever do is complain, yeah. Then they switch the place when I'm not here. But we can, you know we can. But we can, you know we can. Let's fix a landlord, let's fix a landlord, let's fix a landlord man. Roaches up to my knees. Turn the oven on, it smells like gas, yeah. Till the rain pours through the ceiling. But we can, you know we can.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming into the People's Dinner Party, where we interview real people in real situations. Here at the People's Dinner Party, we try not only bring you different things, you know, something for your mind, your body, and also your soul. And today, we got a real special guest today. An awesome artist. I got a story. This is how powerful this man is, right? I knew his art before I knew him. And his art, when I was in my developmental stage, helped bring me along and helped me better understand what was going on in the world politically through his art. And when I was coming into the fold almost 20-something years ago, I think it's been about 30 years ago now, because I was about 24, 25 when I first really got active. And I'm about 53 now. So back then, you really wasn't hip, so to speak, unless you had, you know, one or two things on your wall or in your home. One of them was Seth Tobocman's art and books. And the other was the Beehive posters. And a little unknown fact about me is I'm a cartoonist. So I really dig, you know, art and drawing and all this type of thing. So, man, it's so special. And then, like, a mutual friend of ours who was mentoring me, Borg Loeffner, one day just so happened to mention that she knew him. And I was like, oh, hell no, nah. You know Seth Tobocman? And she's like, yeah, I really know Seth Tobocman. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And he blessed us one day and came through from New York and to visit us at the Olive Branch community one day. And I was like, I mean, it was sunny outside. So when he opened up the door, it was like this aura behind him when he was walking in.
And now
like,
that's
oh, shit. This house. Let me move some of these Krispy Kreme donut boxes out the way so he can get in here. Yeah, but Seth, thank you so very much, man, for blessing us. We're trying to get this thing off the ground. Things done slowed down for me ever since I left New Orleans. And I've been choosing different ways to try to express myself. I really appreciate you coming in today, man. So thank you so much.
Cool. Where are you now?
Guess where? Look, I call myself doing some some real quick research because I'm so comfortable with you. I didn't figure and I knew so much about you. I didn't figure I had to do any research, doing the studying, right? And then some said, nah, go to Wikipedia and, so you can look, professional and all this type of thing. So I look in Wikipedia and it says you're from Cleveland Heights,
Yeah.
Ohio?
Yep.
And you went to Case Western University?
No, I did not go to Case Western University.
Okay.
My dad worked at Case Western. I never.
Okay. Okay. You was a professor of physics or something like that
The
at
professor.
Case Western?
Yeah.
And as I look out the window, I can see Case Western from my window.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm in Cleveland. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and I live in the Huff community,
Mm-hmm.
right on 55th and Chester, the big tall building on 55th and Chester, the Wilson Towers,
Gotcha.
and that's what we're broadcasting from today. We're recording today.
All right.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at. Yeah. So, Seth, I want to know your origin story, man. What got you started?
All right. Well, as you have pointed out, my father was a professor at Case. My mother was a psychiatric social worker at Kaiser.
Okay.
I spent most of the first 16 years of my life in Cleveland Heights. We had about a year in Israel, which was very common for American Jews in the 60s.
Okay. Okay.
And I was actually born in Texas because my dad was working in Texas for a couple of years. My sister was born in England because my dad was working in England for a couple of years. But
Okay.
most of my childhood was in Cleveland Heights. My mother grew up in Kinsman area. Her dad had a little kind of what would today be called a bodega.
Okay.
And they lived upstairs of the bodega. My dad grew up in a number of different cities, Detroit and Cleveland, because his dad kept opening businesses that kept going bankrupt during the Depression, so they kept moving, and
Right.
eventually ended up back in Cleveland.
Okay.
So my grandparents were immigrant small shopkeepers, and my parents were um, educated Jewish professionals living in Cleveland Heights.
Okay.
Um, I gravitated towards comic books really early for the same reason a lot of men of my generation were into comics. If you start asking them, which was I was getting bullied at school.
Right.
And the comic books were my escape, my alternate universe. And there were definitely a few years of my life when um, I associated more with the imaginary characters in comic books than I did with real people.
Right.
And comics were kind of a small world in the 60s and 70s. There was a comics club in Cleveland and called the Cleveland Graphic Art Society. And guess where it met?
Where?
The Crudell Recreation Center.
Where is that at?
That's across the street from the building where Tamir Rice was killed.
Wow.
Okay, so that was where the comics for the entire city of Cleveland met, and it
Wow.
included wealthy black kids from Shakur Heights,
Okay.
kids whose parents worked at the steel mills, and me and my friend Peter Cooper. And we didn't think anything of it. My dad, who drove us to the meeting, said, I don't believe all you people are in the same room. And I said, why? We all like comics. And he was like, no, you don't get it. Okay.
Right.
So, right. Because comics was very small. So we knew everybody in Cleveland who was involved in comics back then.
Okay.
Uh, and we were quite fanatical in our dedication to comic books as
Okay.
kids. when I was in middle school. And we had some relatives in Detroit, and when they had like the first comic book conventions were the Detroit Triple Fanfare in Detroit. And my
Okay.
dad drove us out there so he could visit the relatives and leave us at the comic book convention.
Right.
And we met a lot of comic book professionals. And I actually, the only award I ever won was at the amateur contest at the Detroit Triple Fanfare.
Oh,
Um, that's the only art contest I've ever won.
you would
Uh,
show later.
and that was an award from, of all people, Vaughn Bodie and Jeffrey Catherine Jones,
Okay.
both of whom would eventually turn out to be trans women over the
Okay.
course of their lives, and who were a huge influence on me.
Okay.
Very, very supportive of my work and encouraged me to think outside of the box as far as comics. They were going back and forth to Europe, and they would say, look, in Europe, people call this an art form. Vaughn Bodie said this work had been shown at the Louvre. And I was like,
Okay.
the Louvre, right? And they showed me European comics and how different European comics were from American comics, and kind of corrupted me so I could never end up working in straight comics.
Right.
And of course, those who follow all this will know that Vaughn Bodie died in the early 70s when he was quite young. And I drifted away from comics when
Okay.
I was in high school. Uh,
Okay.
I stopped being involved in comics, and when I went to college for something else. Uh,
Okay.
I was extremely depressed and extremely, I was a very fucked up 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old.
I can
I,
relate.
I eventually got thrown out of the dorms in a drug-related incident. Uh,
Okay.
and of something really stupid. I wound up storing my LSD in my roommate's freezer, and it turned out his father was a senator.
Oh,
Yeah,
lucky
so I
you.
was out of there. You know, I
Yeah.
did a lot of dumb things. And eventually, my friend Peter Cooper came to New York and started working in um, comics at a low level. Uh,
Okay.
Started working as an inker and an assistant, and he was actually making money at this. And I was like, holy shit, man, you're actually doing this? And gee, um, I guess I could do this. And I had at that point dropped out of school and was like hanging out with a lot of punk rockers and living in a apartment in the Lower East Side, which is the only place, which was a cheap place to live back then.
Okay.
It's not now, but it was a very cheap place to live back then. I think my rent was like 150 a month. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and that would have been normal for that block at that time.
Okay.
It was a block with a lot of drug dealing, like, and a lot of violence. The day I moved in, somebody was stabbed in the front doorway. So that's where I was, and um, I started trying to work professionally in comics, which was not that easy. Um, I did I did illustrations for the New York Rocker,
Okay.
which I got paid
Wow.
for. I did illustrations for the East Village Eye, which I did not get paid for. And eventually, Peter and I started our own magazine. Um,
Okay.
we were taking um, art classes part-time at Pratt Institute. We were not fully enrolled.
Right.
And we never got degrees. Peter and I both, neither of us have degrees. Um, but we started magazine World War III there. Uh,
Okay.
and we had kind of vague political notions that like Reagan was a bad guy, and that I remember that one of the things that inspired us to start the magazine was the Iran hostage crisis.
I remember that.
That I can remember going back to Cleveland and seeing at Russo's supermarket, they were selling these big buttons that said in large letters, "Fuck Iran." And all these people were walking around Cleveland Heights with these big buttons that said, "Fuck Iran." And these were the same people who would have told me to wash my mouth out with soap if I said the word fuck.
Right.
Okay. But they could wear this button. It was okay to wear this big button. And the thing is that at college, I had met people from Iran. Actually, our dorm was filled with Iranian students.
Right.
And it was interesting. There was basically, people in Iran knew there was going to be a revolution, and anybody who could afford to got their kids out of the country as fast as they could.
Right.
And
Right.
we had every imaginable political faction of Iran in our dorm. We had monarchists, we had socialists, and we had a couple of Khomeini people. And they were
Right.
all in the dorm, and they wouldn't sit together, of course. So
Right.
I knew that there was an issue, and I knew that my friends from Iran were very frightened of the Savak, which is the Iranian secret police, who were
Oh,
active in the United States. Okay,
wow.
they were active here, and they
Wow.
were worried about that. Like if you see pictures of the anti-Shah demonstrations in the 70s in Washington, D.C.,
Right.
everybody, they're
Right.
masked because they don't want reprisals against their families.
Okay.
Okay. So they knew that the Iranian secret police were right there in front of them all the time.
Okay.
And so, when the
Wow.
Iranians took over the American embassy, I was like, yeah, they have a very good reason to do that.
Right.
That's not surprising. That's exactly what I would do if I was in their shoes.
Right.
Um, because that's the way to keep the United States from going in, staging a coup, and putting the Shah back in.
Right.
But people who'd never heard of the place before last week and who had not used four-letter words in public since they were young,
Okay.
walking around with this big button that said "fuck Iran." And I was like, well, if these people get to express themselves, I think I do too.
Right on.
Oh, right. And so we started this magazine, and we didn't know that much about politics, but we started it. And it was kind of it was, you know, 79, 80, 81, which was a very conservative period in the United States. There was a period where, um, if you can put it in context, okay, the weather people turned themselves in,
Wow.
right? The weather people had
Wow.
decided that it was all a big mistake and we're turning ourselves in. Okay.
Wow.
It was a period when um, the moral majority seemed to be the big, powerful new political force in the United States. It was a period when Reagan was, gaining popularity, even though he'd been a joke a couple years earlier. You know,
Okay.
so all those things, like we were, I mean, we um we were swimming against the tide at that time, although we didn't really know where we were going. But somehow, people saw, oh, there's a couple of these, kids who
Okay.
started this comic book and they're not down with the program. And that attracted a lot of people who were a lot smarter than we were, frankly.
Right.
Educated us a great deal.
Okay.
And um, all the people who came to the magazine helped me develop politically. So I learned a lot from that. And then I learned a lot from living in the Lower East Side of New York at a period where we were going from, the late 70s when the area had been burned out and abandoned to the early 80s when the area was being gentrified. And we were exactly in that moment. And
Okay.
there was a lot of political activity around that. There was a very active tenants um, association in the building I was in. Um,
Okay.
and I was very impressed with how valuable that was for everybody, that, it was a political activity and it produced actual positive results in people's lives. I was kind of amazed.
Right on.
It was not,
Right on.
it's like, oh, this made things better for everyone, and it actually worked. Um, and there was also a place called Chadas Community Center, which was
Okay.
an old school building on 9th Street between Avenues B and C that had been taken over by um, a bunch of guys who used to be a Puerto Rican street gang. They used to be in the Assassins in the 70s. That's what they were called. And then they became the Real Great Society, kind of saying to Lyndon
Okay.
Johnson, we're the real great society, not you. And they were
Right.
running community services there of all sorts. And
O-
a number of us were recruited to teach art to local kids there. Um,
Okay.
that school. And so we got to know the kids in the neighborhood and they got to know us. And so all of those things, helped me develop artistically and politically. I met Eric Drucker there. Eric Drucker was teaching there. Paula Hewitt was teaching there.
Okay.
I met Sabrina Jones around that time, and we started doing this magazine. Um,
Okay.
and then a little further down the road, we met all the people who were squatting buildings in the Lower East Side, and we got to know that movement and provided artwork to that movement. And eventually, a lot of us got involved in that movement. Some of the artists from World War III are still living in the former squats. Fly still does. Mac McGill still does. Um,
Okay.
they're living in buildings that were squatted and over the course of 15 years became legalized. So
Okay.
homeowners in the
O-
lower. So the squatters movement were taking over abandoned buildings and that were owned by the city of New York that
Okay.
had been abandoned by their landlords, and they were renovating those buildings to make housing essentially for themselves, but collectively inviting a lot of different people in. A lot of homeless people became part of it. Um, and there was a very active homeless movement in Tompkins Square Park
Okay.
that was allied with the squatter movement. And so I had the privilege of participating in some of that and learning from some of that. And
O-
that became the basis of a lot of my artwork. Um,
Wow.
and you know, um, and that was not unique to me. There were a number of artists who were very involved in the squatter movement. Fly was very involved. Mac McGill was very involved. Uh,
Okay.
Von Neville was very involved. Lauren Savannah Bima was very involved. A lot of art. James Romberger was not involved in the squatter movement, but he did do a lot of artwork about the squatter movement because he witnessed it, because he was in the neighborhood, and he did some amazing um, pastel drawings that are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Right.
Um, you know, um, a lot of which portray the riots in the neighborhood at that time. Um,
Okay.
so we all had that participation, and that was where our artwork came from at that time.
Okay.
And
Wow.
yeah, so
Okay. No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
oh, and eventually I did have to step off of my involvement with the squatter movement. I
Okay.
got to the point where I had three different men telling people publicly, I'm going to kill Seth Tobocman. And I'm like,
Wow.
okay, I'm done with this. And I kind of stepped back from that. Um,
Okay.
and I got involved in other things and I did other things. And
Okay.
eventually, um, I was later involved with the anti-globalization movement, and that's how I met
O-
Bork
Okay.
in
Okay.
DC. Um, for the protest at the World Bank. And then eventually, you know, I did go to New Orleans for a short period of time, met you,
Right.
saw Ground Collective.
Right.
Um, managed to get over to Palestine a little bit, learn something from that.
Okay.
Uh, and nowadays, what I'm doing is, first of all, um, I'm teaching people to draw comics.
Okay.
You know, I mean, when we were coming up, there was almost no such thing as a college class in drawing comics. I think School of Visual Arts had a little bit of that. Most of the other
Right.
schools did not.
Right.
Um, I'm now teaching at School of Visual Arts.
Okay.
To young people want to draw comics. I also teach an independent online course that's for people who want to draw political comics. Uh,
Okay.
and you know, so I'm doing both of those things. So you know, the online course is more specifically my type of work. When I'm teaching at SVA, a lot of these kids, you know, quite understandably,
Right.
be in the mainstream comics where you can make good money, frankly, you know, and I
Right.
don't blame them. But so that's how those classes are structured. Whereas the online class I'm teaching is really
Okay.
want to do the type of work I do. Um,
Okay.
and it is not accredited and it's significantly cheaper than going to
Okay.
college. You know, um, you know, you can't show it to anyone and say, "Oh, I got a good grade in this class. You know, let me into your school." It won't mean anything. But
Right.
that it's you know, I'm talking about what I actually know, what I
Right.
actually so I'm doing those things, and then the magazine is still going, and um we've kind of broadened our focus. We're more of a collective than we were. I mean, it was in theory a collective when Peter and I started it, but it was really run by me and Peter and one or two other people. And
Okay.
it's really organized around the personalities of the people who were running it. It was
Right.
all um, entirely white, mostly Jewish, and majority male in the
Okay.
10 years, you know. Um, and it became a lot more women involved in the 90s and a lot
Okay.
of artists of color involved in the 90s.
Okay.
And what we've been doing now is we've tried to become a lot more international. There's
Awesome.
really exciting artwork being done in the Middle East right now.
Okay.
You know, the Arab Spring brought a whole lot of artists to the surface. So we had an issue that was mostly artists from Egypt um, and Lebanon and
Wow.
Syria. Then
Wow.
we're working on an issue now where we have a lot of Palestinian artists. We have about 5 Palestinian artists in the next issue, and we have
Okay.
also have some Ukrainian writers, and we actually have a Russian artist who's not
Wow.
using real name, you know.
Okay.
And so, you know, comics has become a much more international art movement. It's like some of the most interesting work that's been
Yes.
done in the last 10 years is being done in places that maybe don't even have much of a formal comic book industry in the business sense, you know.
Right.
But there are people doing experimental comics there.
Right.
Um, like people I would mention would be Magdi Al-Shafi in Egypt. Um, I would mention Muhammad Sabana in Palestine.
Right.
Uh,
Is that
I yeah.
um the cartoon where the Palestinian with his hands behind his back turning his
Okay,
back?
that is Naji Al-Ali. That is Naji
Nausea.
Ali, who was assassinated in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was actually the first real awareness I had of the Palestinian issue was that Eric Drucker brought it to my attention, to
Right.
our attention, that a cartoonist had been assassinated. And
Wow.
we there was an interview with Naji in The Militant, which was a radical newspaper at the time. And we found a couple books of his cartoons at an anarchist bookstore. And actually, I was visiting some people in California, and they said, "Oh, here's a book of his cartoons." And this is the only time we've done this. We illegally published his cartoons without permission and published this interview that we swiped from The Militant because we
Right.
said, this is so important. A cartoonist has been killed. We
God
have
bless
to publish this. It doesn't matter. And back then, that's, pre-internet. We had no idea who his relatives were. We had no idea that he had a wife who I think was in England. We had
Right.
no idea how to contact these people. We just said, let's print it. And along with that, Peter Cooper, Eric Drucker, and I each did pieces of our own kind of complex feelings about the Israel-Palestine conflict from the little that we knew at that time.
Okay.
Eric Drucker having the clearest political position of the three of us, I would say. And, that was how I came to know the Palestine issue. Now, Naji is an amazing comic book artist. There's a documentary, an old BBC documentary about him called Naji Ali, An Artist with Vision, which is the worst name for a documentary about a cartoonist I can think of. An artist with vision. That's just terrible.
Right.
But it's actually a very good and useful documentary. I learned a lot from it. Naji was critical. He was Palestinian. He was, of course, very critical of Israel, but he was also critical of everybody else. He was critical of Arafat. He was critical of the Saudis, and nobody really knows who bumped him off because he had some arguments. But it's amazing and it's still ambiguous how he died and who was behind it. The people who shot him have never been brought to justice. And this happened, right? But he's, an inspiring figure to generations of people and really is in a lot of ways an inspiring figure to the entire Arab world as far as cartooning goes. And defines what is sort of the nature of political cartooning in the Arab, which is that it uses a lot of well understood local symbols to create kind of a language explaining a political situation. You have a really active political press all over the Arab world. And it's also, it's not touch football. It's a contact sport. Cartoonists die or are imprisoned or are beaten up in the Arab states regularly. I could give a list of people who did not fare very well. So it's a serious thing to be a political cartoonist in that part of the world. And that extends to this day where, Ferzat in Syria has actually a drawing of himself in bandages, with all his fingers bandaged except one. Because Assad's people beat him up. That seems to be the story there. And I know, like, we became aware of Mohammed Subana when he was imprisoned in Israel. And we signed a petition in support of him, which is actually, I was actually violating one of the positions of the magazine, which is that we don't endorse anything. We've taken the position that the magazine is all these different people, and we can't endorse anything as a magazine. We can only endorse things as an individual. And I said, well, okay, this is a cartoonist, and he's in jail. Come on, let's sign this. And so we signed it, and when he came out of jail, we developed a relationship with Mohammed Sabana, and on his visits to New York, I've had the privilege of having him speak to my classes and um, seen his work develop, and his work developed enormously over the
Right.
years.
Right.
You know, his work was quite simple before he went to prison. He actually told me that his artwork improved in prison because he didn't have access to computers.
Right.
And, you know, I tell that to my students every year because they overuse the computer. They don't draw with a pencil and paper anymore.
Right.
Like
Which I
work.
think is kind of like a shame. I'm not of course, I'm not a professional artist or anything like that, but the emotion for me is very important. I do my best work when I'm stressed out or going through some type of horror. When my head is kind of clear, I'm not that good. But when I'm really good, and that's what I use it for. When I was a child, I was abused, getting beat with axe handles, all this type of thing. And what it did, and I had comic books.
Mm.
They were my escape, and it's also how a third grader knew about gamma radiation, and other things. So I could definitely understand that, but yeah, that's and to a degree too. I'm also very I like jazz, but I like old school jazz as opposed to the whole computerized plug it up type of deal.
Mhm.
I really prefer like the old school jazz. So I in a way I kind of get what you're saying. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, where did the concept of World War Three for your company, where did that come from?
Um, it came from the atmosphere in 1979, 1980,
Okay.
which was that Ronald Reagan was um, ascending. He was not yet president, but everybody kind of knew he was coming in.
Excuse me.
Um, U.S. cruise missiles were being placed in Europe.
Okay.
Um, People thought there was going to be a war with Iran.
Okay.
Um, and a a retired British admiral had written a book called World War III, which was about how World War III would be fought and won.
Would play out. Okay.
Okay, and that he'd written this book, and I believe in his scenario, World War III would be started by Gaddafi in Libya.
Okay.
Um, that
Wow.
that was the first a lot of us have ever heard of Gaddafi,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So the phrase was kind of in the air at that
Right.
moment, right?
Right.
And so we were not unique in grabbing onto that phrase. There were a number of people who were politically active in 79, 80 who were using that phrase.
Okay.
Um, so I think we grabbed that phrase. We said, okay, let's do this this anti-war magazine because it seems like we're headed for a war.
Right.
And in a couple years, we started saying, okay, um, can we expand this idea and not just talk about international politics, but talk about local issues where we have a lot more knowledge, frankly, because we were
Right.
living on the Lower East Side. Most of us, everybody but Cooper basically lived downtown back
Right.
then. And so can we talk about what's going on in our immediate environment and connect that to the idea of World War III? And we decided we could.
Okay.
And we continued with the title, although we broadened it out to cover a lot of different things. And we didn't stick to doing things about global international politics. Although right now we are doing an issue called World War III Now question mark, where we are
Okay.
global international politics, because that's certainly something everyone's thinking about right now.
We definitely gonna make sure we get the information, if you don't mind, about your class and put it in, and embed it in the interview, and also the new work that you guys are working on as well.
I,
if that's okay.
I will send links to you. It may take a day or two.
No problem. No problem. No problem. Um, yeah. Also, I wanted to thank you too, for um coming down and making those comics for Common Ground. That was a blessing. That was like, so
I wish
I knew, huh?
I wish I could have spent more time there. You know, I had a decent job for once in my life. I was teaching at a college, and I'm not. Gosh, I can't throw this away and just
You don't
move.
want to blow it.
She wanted me to. Like the first,
Yeah.
I'm going down. You coming down? I'm like, I got a job, but I can come down during break. Um,
Right.
and you guys did really important work there. I mean,
Right.
what you did in Common Ground is an important moment in history because that was the first, but it is not going to be the last
Yeah.
flood because of global warming. And you showed that there can be a popular, I mean, just for those who don't know what Suncere did, okay, and what Bork did,
Don't make me cry.
city New Orleans was flooded, and the government was completely negligent about doing anything for people in New Orleans because so much of the population in New Orleans was black and because Bush was generally negligent about everything anyway. Um, and volunteers went down to New Orleans and stepped in and started, fixing up people's homes and making it possible for people to move back. And when I went to visit them, which was, I think, 2 months after Katrina, basically, the lower ninth ward, basically, y'all were the government of the
Right.
lower ninth ward for about a year. There
Right.
was nobody taking care of anything down there except
Right.
you.
Right.
And you and another organization called People's Hurricane Relief.
Yeah.
Was
Exactly.
like my impression is that Common Ground was like a coalition of former Black Panthers, anarchists, and some Muslim folks,
Right.
and that People's Hurricane Relief was like old communists and Democrats.
Right.
But we were all between the two organizations. You were basically running certain parts of New Orleans for about a year until the government finally sort of got their act together and
Right.
stepped in. And then the first thing they did was like push you guys out of the way. But
Try
it
to.
it showed what people could do without the government, and it showed that there was a real basis for organizing around this type of disaster. And since then, we've had other similar events. I mean, there was, Hurricane Sandy in New York, and there was Occupy Sandy, you
I
know,
came up with that.
and this is something that's now become a really consistent part of American life, actually, is that there are every year a couple of cities that get flooded and that people have to mobilize to fix things up.
Right.
And it's almost kind of normalized, which is a bit scary. But
Right.
okay, that was a historic event, and it was a great privilege to do a graphic for Common Ground. I remember that Bork called me up and she said basically what she wanted it to be, and I, drew something and I scanned it and I sent it to her, and it became the Common Ground T-shirt. And
Right. Right.
an incredibly popular graphic. People have asked for it again and again for all sorts of things, because anytime there's like a self-help issue, the graphic said the government does not care. We the people must help each other,
That's
and
right.
um, that was used during the pandemic. That it's kind of an evergreen piece. Like every few years, there's something the government should be doing but isn't, and
Right.
they have to take up the slack. And so that graphic gets used again and again, and that came out of your work.
Man. I never, and this is not me patting myself on the back, this is just fact. I never thought for one moment while we were doing that work, or while I was down there doing that work, that 10 years later, somebody would say in a sentence that I was one of the godfathers of the new modern day mutual aid. And I mean, Seth, I have been going through all types of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxieties, and trying to deal with life after, Katrina. And it's been difficult. My head, at the time was kind of like buried in the sand. And for somebody to say something like that, I didn't even realize that the world was changing like that until it was brought to my attention. And I'm proud to serve. And if I was healthy, I would do it again and again and again. And we had some super dedicated people. We had some of the best activists on the planet, not just talking, but would work from sun up to sundown. Common Ground didn't happen, by accident. A lot of good people. My name gets mentioned, and a few other people's like Malink and Miss Sharon and Borg, and their names get mentioned. But there's a lot of good people that held me up. My name stands on the shoulders of a lot of volunteers that believed in what we were doing, and they made life so much more easier for me, and I feel bad sometimes because even though I was the project manager about like 6, 7 different sites, it was other people's work. I organized it and I took care of them and I nurtured them as best I could and gave them the direction that they needed, and the strength. I was kind of like their backbone too, which wore me out, trying to be strong for so many people, seeing all this craziness going on, but the comic was very important, along with Francisco. He came up with a hold on for a sec.
Post Katrina portraits. Hold on. Hello? I'm not sure what Suncere is doing, but seeing as we got a blank space here, yeah. Francisco did this amazing book called Post-Katrina Portraits that was, he
I'm
basically,
back.
every day he did portraits of people who he met in New
Right.
Orleans with Katrina,
Right.
and she did a book of it. And they're really beautiful drawings and record his activism. Of course, Francisco was there from the first day, and he
Day one.
a big part of Common Ground. I mean, I was there for a couple weeks, and
Right.
Francisco did the whole thing, and he made this amazing book about it called Post.
Let me tell you how now even Francisco, I believe, forgot um how that actually got started. Those drawings got started. We were surrounded by maybe like 4 Black Hawk helicopters. There was I think a battleship or something like that was in the Mississippi, um, which was like less than a mile from the house. It was over there by the ferry. Over there by the ferry. And if you look at the Crescent City Bridge, you see nothing but military vehicles traveling in one direction for hours. You had Homeland Security, sometimes anywhere between 24 to 30 cars deep traveling around. And then you had some not so nice guardsmen. What do you call these guys?
National Guard?
The National Guard, not so nice National Guardsmen. And it felt more like a war than a recovery. We had the vigilantes who, lived in the back of us, and they had dropped about 19 black men before we got there. But circling back to Francisco and the story, I know for a fact how those drawings got started. We didn't, both black and white, did not think, volunteers, we were at Malink's house, did not think we were going to make it home. We thought we were going to die there. So Francisco, basically, they were death masks. And that's how it got started. And it snowballed into later into the year, and then the following year into an actual book. But because we would tell people that would come down all the time, or people that we would talk to on the phone, that we wish we could bottle up this emotion that we feel and the smell of the place. And Francisco's drawing was the best we could do to capture all that emotion. And yeah, so that, it was very important because we all thought we was dead. We did not think we were going to make it home. Like I said, both black and white, because for one, you would think. I mean, there was some white skin privilege there, but if you were helping black people, you were a Yankee or a nigger lover, so you were a target too. And some of the white comrades did get targeted at gunpoint several times by either the NOPD or the or Homeland Security. It was a crazy time. I want to get back. Are you still in contact with Mr. Cooper?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And I had a friend of mine. I wanted to make sure I mentioned him. His name is Cooper Andrews. And Cooper made a great sacrifice. Cooper followed me around he's from here in Cleveland, Ohio. I met him when he was like 17, 18 years old. He was barely out of high school. And I took him to the Common Ground reunion, and he helped me comprise some things, for a book. I still got maybe like 200 pages for this book, but this young man helped me with this. And then he went into the Marine Corps, which I was dead set against, but I was like, man, I don't have any resources or the time to spend with you, the time and resources that you actually need. So, okay, cool. Then he come out the Marine Corps, and he joined the Foreign Legion, and went to Ukraine and joined an anarchist, rebel anarchist group there that fought back against Putin and the Wagner group. And I cussed him out. I cussed him out before he went, because he's biracial, but black. To me, he's black. And I was like, yo, man, what the hell are you doing, bro? You know what I'm saying? We need you here. But the common ground in me understand that once you get that calling to go, that it doesn't matter what other people think. You gotta follow it. If you don't follow that calling, it's gonna drive you crazy until you go through. And my greatest fear happened. He was trying to evacuate. Him and his unit was trying to evacuate people. I forgot the name of the main thoroughfare, but it was a main road where a lot of the supplies came in. And him and his comrades were fighting to keep that open so the supply line would stay open. And Cooper, at 25 years old, lost his life trying to evacuate people being bombed by the Wagner group. And it broke my heart. I was mad at him. but at the same time, I was proud of him at the same time. And I felt a little guilty because I was like, man, maybe if I didn't bring him around this common ground shit, he wouldn't have had the idea to take it that far, you know. But I'm proud of him. I'm proud of him. And everything I do now in the community is Cooper Andrews Christmas parties, Cooper Andrews barbecue. You know, it's a Valentine's Day. You know, we only like serve women, no kids, no men. It would also be named after Cooper and everything. I wanted to bring that up because you had brought up Ukraine. But before we go, I wanted to get your opinion on what's going on in Palestine. You know, what they don't show is the resistance. And from what I hear, Hamas has gained back over 400 acres of land. It's kind of like economically bankrupting Israel and embarrassing these cats, you know. And we don't get to see that in the news. But for folks that's watching before Seth, you know, makes his comment, I just want to let y'all know it's no fucking fun at all seeing babies being buried under rubble with our tax money, 2,000 pound bombs. And see, what you people really don't realize is just because the building collapsed, it doesn't kill you instantly all the time. You might be trapped under that rubble with broken ribs, a broken leg by yourself. And look how family orientated folks in Palestine is. And to die by yourself without your family around, people that love you and nurture you, it has to be a fucking nightmare. And I don't, you know, I don't condone it. I wish the Palestinians all the love in the world and and get their state back. And also too, shout out to them folks in Yemen. Them Houthis love you to death, bruh. I love you to death. Love you to death. But I just wanted to get that off my chest, Seth. And so you know, what do you see? You know, what do you think about this war? What you
I
want to tell us?
I think that you know, it's being portrayed one way and history is going to look at it another way.
Right.
History, whatever you think of communism, history condemns communism for the Holodomor, which was the death by hunger that took place in Ukraine under Stalin. That he
Right.
decided Ukrainians weren't loyal to him, so he was going to create mass starvation. That's what
Right.
happened. And that is now condemned as a genocide, and nothing that could be done historically could live that down
Right.
because it killed that many people. Fascism, you know, at one point, fascism was seen as a type of progressive movement of like centralizing power in the state so the state could do things for the national majority of people. And Hitler established, you know, beyond question that fascism was evil by the actions of the Nazi state of killing millions of people who were no threat to Germany at all.
None.
No problem to Germany at all, and yet he killed them. You know, um, the United States in its, supposed attempt to defend democracy all over the world massacred people in Hiroshima and then proceeded to do that again in Vietnam. And the
Right.
United States and American imperialism are condemned by that.
Right.
Zionism has now condemned itself.
Right.
This action. If there was any, if the cost of having a state for the Jews in the Middle East is that on a fairly regular basis, you're going to have to kill this many people, I think most people are going to say this is a lot of garbage.
Right.
But you can't do this. You
Right.
know, I mean, there's all kinds of ways they're covering for it right now. You know, give it a little bit of time and it's all going to look one way very clearly. That,
Right.
this is completely unacceptable
Right.
act. And if the creation of a Jewish state requires this,
Yes.
not worth it. It's just
Right.
not. I don't see how anyone can say, oh yeah, I want a state and I'll kill 20,000 people for it any day of the week. Nah,
Right.
nah.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's horrible. I think that the American involvement is horrible.
Right.
I think the tendency of the Democratic Party to take it for granted that um, that they have to worry about Jewish votes and they don't have to worry about Arab votes. I think that's
Right.
pretty fucking dumb, and I think they're finding that out.
Right.
Uh, you know, I said about 10 years ago that if there was anything Israel was accused of that they haven't done, give them a week.
Right. Yeah.
And at this
And
point,
yeah. Yeah. At this point, that's fucking true.
you know, um, I think that I would say that from my point of view, like who gives a fuck about my point of view? I'm an American Jewish guy, but my point of view, um, when they first had the so-called peace process and the so-called proposal of a two-state solution, I
Right.
liked that idea, not because I thought it was just, which it wouldn't be, okay, but
Right.
because I thought it would save a lot of people's lives.
Right.
And, just as, you know, the peace process in Ireland has meant, like, if I talk to my Irish students, they'll say, no, of course I don't want the English in there. Of course, I think that um, the Irish Protestants are a bunch of wankers, but do I really want to strap a bomb to myself and blow myself up, or do I want to go to college and have a decent life? I think I'll go to college and have a decent life. They could have
Right.
offered that.
Right.
Could have done that.
Right.
Except a big section of the Jewish community wouldn't accept it,
Right.
particularly the ultra Orthodox from Brooklyn, actually, who went over there and shot the place up.
Right.
Assassinated the prime minister. They assassinated the prime minister of Israel.
Right.
Right, and the people who assassinated him are now in the government. You know,
Right.
um,
Wow.
they they shot up a mosque at a time when there was a peace agreement that was holding. They did all this stuff because they didn't accept the idea of trying to work things out. So,
Right.
okay, we've now had 20 years of a so-called peace process that's worth nothing. We've had 20 years of talk about a two-state solution that nobody can take seriously anymore.
Right.
At this point, what's on the table is a one-state solution.
Right.
Best you can hope for. And
Right.
that's actually, if it could happen, that's a good thing.
Right.
It's pretty hard thing to achieve. Um, you know, um, I know Stanley Cohen, who works with Hamas, feels that that's where they're headed, that they're going to have a one-state solution. That could be a really good thing. It's actually the way most people in the world think you should live. Most
Right.
people believe that we don't want to live in a country where your rights are determined by your national origin. We want you to have certain rights at birth that everybody has. We think
Humanity.
people to live,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay. Most of the world thinks that's the normal way to live.
Right.
The idea of creating a state for one nationality in land that has been historically inhabited by several nationalities it has got to have results like the results it's getting. So I think the Zionist idea has played itself out at this point. That
Right.
it's this that Zionism is discredited by its own actions.
Right.
This
It's
is the
burning itself out.
Jewish state, then maybe it ain't worth it.
Right.
You know, I understand, and my parents' generation really wanted a Jewish state. You
Right.
know, with people who thought that was a great idea, thought it was the most wonderful thing that ever happened. Um, it doesn't seem to have worked out that well.
Right.
You know, it seems like requires it requires what they're doing in Gaza to have this idea. So this idea doesn't work. You
Right.
know, I don't see how they can go back from this. I don't see how they can come back from this. I think they've completely taken the car has gone off the side of the cliff.
Right.
I've been driving towards this cliff for a while. I've been saying the car has no brakes. You got a problem here. You know, you're like, oh no, it's fine. We've got a wall. Nobody's going to get through the wall. Everything's fine. Car's now gone off the cliff. I don't see how you can pull the car back from the cliff.
Right. Right. In
You
a
know,
healthy way. Yeah.
I don't see.
I yeah.
I
I have a hard time. Pardon self. I have a hard time. I already know what this government is like. Okay.
Mhm.
But the scary thing to me, because I come up in the streets too in DC. And the scary thing to me is how America could fund a group of people taking another group of people, marching them to the center of the planet, and executing them right in front of us, and piss on our leg and tell us to shower water, and then try to outlaw the protests and the companies that go along with it. But one thing that come to mind that Israel and Adolf Hitler have in common, American business
Yep.
in both.
Yep.
American business in both. And my thing is, how do I go back to normalcy? How do I believe in voting for a Democrat or a Republican or anyone else for president? This ain't a fucking Republican president that's doing this shit. This is the good guy. I'm Biden. You should vote for me. You're black. So, I was a vice president to a black man. How in the fuck do I go back and believe in anything you got to say? Motherfucker, you can't even lie to me right anymore. You don't even care. It's almost like a husband and wife, and the husband openly cheats right in front of his wife. You just don't give a fuck anymore.
Mhm.
How do I believe in anything you got to say anymore? How do I do that? I talked to my aunt, very religious woman, and we talk about Palestine. And I'm like, is anyone in the pulpit talking about Palestine and how wrong this thing is? Because I'm like, your Lord and Savior, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, the road to Damascus, all these places are being ripped apart. And what I learned in New Orleans when we did the church action was this word called desecration. And I looked it up the other day. When you do something foul to a holy area or location, and I'm like, you guys are not gonna like speak up against this, because this is the best time to, and Christmas is approaching and all this type of thing. Man, not to put my auntie on blast, but she was like, well, I don't like the fact that the Republicans are trying to tell us who to vote for, and I'm going to vote for Biden. I'm like, how in the hell can you vote for this man who just took your tax money to murder 28,000 people, including children. 80 at one time, 85,000 pregnant women was in jeopardy. I can't imagine. I just don't know how. I know they were monsters, but this is a whole nother level because now you're showing it to us openly. You know, from the last time I checked, over 60% of the people in America was against this war. And yet and still you did it any goddamn way. So that means you don't give a fuck about democracy. You don't give a fuck about democracy, especially if it interferes with your business. Because this country is what? It's not really a republic. It's a goddamn corporation. That shit went out the window a long time ago. But that's what I'm struggling with now. And a voice came to me. I'm sorry to take up so much time. A voice came to me and said, when I was panicking, you know, it told me, hold your position. Keep doing what you're doing. Hold your position. Don't let go. Keep doing it. Keep going. Keep going. You know, and that's what I'm doing. Cause this is beyond embarrassing. How can I expect reparations from motherfuckers that would do some shit like this? How can I expect police brutality to stop when these motherfuckers is doing shit like this? I had a glimpse when I was in New Orleans how they fucked over poor white people. And I was like, my God, if they're gonna fuck over poor white people like this, we don't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting any real justice in this country. I often joke that we need to build we don't help these motherfuckers get to space. We need to build a rocket ship, get the fuck out of here, let these crazy motherfuckers have it, get the fuck out of here. And the first thing we do when we land on a reasonable planet is build some surface-to-air missiles just in case these motherfuckers decide to follow us. To make sure that they do not, drag us back into this bullshit. Because I just don't see a end to this shit. And for my pro-African brothers and sisters, Pan-African brothers and sisters, of course I'm keeping up what's going on in Sudan. Of course I'm keeping up. See, you motherfuckers wasn't that concerned when we told you 6 million Africans had died in the East Congo so we could have this shit right here. That 6-year-old children were digging in the mud, for minerals, to support our green tech, our green movement. You looked the other way. You didn't give a fuck. Niger, they're sick and tired of this shit. Burkina Faso, they're sick and tired of this shit. So this is going to be real interesting. And I think your art and your comrades' art, I can't wait to read how you put this into context. I can't wait. In closing, Seth, I wanted to tell you, man, because I want to get you out of here. I don't want to keep you that long. As a friend, I could fucking talk to you forever about this shit. So do you have any okay, you mentioned you had like a new project coming up soon?
What I got, we got the new issue of the magazine, which will come out. It'll come out in October. And it's called World War III Now, ? And it has artwork from artists all over the world, along with suspects from World War III.
Okay.
So I got that. I'm working, and I don't know when I'll get done with it. I'm working on a graphic novel about my mother and father, actually. But that's
cool.
Because I'm, processing their exit from this world and what I learned from it.
Right.
And other than that, I'm teaching class. I'm teaching people to draw comics and publishing comics. And,
right.
Working on whatever projects come up. which
Right.
something all the time, you know. I'm very open. If people are organizing around Palestine or people organizing around U.S. intervention in other countries and they need some artwork, they should get in touch with me. I'm
Okay.
very happy to do a piece for them the way I did a piece for Common Ground.
Yes,
It's,
sir.
you know, um, and yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Uh,
Right.
and I want to give another shout out to Mohammed Sabana. His book, which is available now, is called Power Born of Dreams, and you should check it
Okay.
out.
Right
Authored
on.
imprisonment in an Israeli prison. Uh,
Wow.
beautiful, beautiful work of art,
Right.
transcendent, magical in a lot of ways. Even though it's about
Right.
a difficult situation, he finds a way to bring other things into it, and
Right.
you should check that out. Um, People should check out the work of Kate Evans, who did an
Okay.
amazing threads from the refugee crisis that's about the immigrant encampments in France. She visited those encampments. She did a book about that. You know, and check out all the work that the new generation of graphic novelists are doing, which is just mind-blowing stuff that people are coming
Right.
up with every day.
Right.
Uh, so that's what I would put on the table there.
Right on. Well, look, Seth, man, I C4 couldn't blow the smile off my face. And the reason for that is that, man, I landed you for this interview. Um, even though I'm not in contact with you on a regular basis or whatever, but I just want to let you know, man, I love you and I admired you for a very long time. And I really appreciate the fact, as time goes on, you're getting stronger and you're teaching the next generation, this type of art because it's extrememely, extremely important. I call you the white Emory Douglas.
That's too high a compliment.
Yeah, but that's how I see you. Man, I want to thank you for coming and sitting down with us at the People's Dinner Party. Folks, go out and please look up the World War II artists here, the cartoonists, and educate yourself. And if you're not educated about what's going on, this is an easier way to do it. Get the books for your family, for your children, and keep it on the coffee table or in the middle of the dinner table. So all your friends will come in and see it and observe it and pick it up and read it, because all the interviews and everything I've done over the years and people I've talked to over the years, even I forget that my real start in the very beginning of my development, there was Seth Tobocman and his artwork, along with the Beehive Collective. The art caught me. It was beautiful, and I appreciate it, and I think what's also special about your art is that you're not halfway across the world, especially how you started out. You're not halfway across the world, in some comfortable place drawing this shit. You started out in the thick of it, witnessing what was actually going on, which to me makes the work even more powerful because you can capture the emotion of the people. When you come down in New Orleans, uh, burnout isn't, we always said in with Common Ground, burnout is 2 weeks. So really 2 weeks was a very long time to absorb all that horse shit that was going on down there. And the beauty too. It was a lot of beauty in it because we helped each other. And see, that's one of the lessons I want y'all to learn viewing this. We are beautiful. Seth had mentioned that the different like anarchists and socialists and Black Panthers, But there were also Republicans that come down to volunteer. I remember one, it was an older guy, he was about 75 years old, and his sister was a nurse. He was career Marine. And me and him both stood in the middle of the street on Newton Street in front of Malink's house. And after I showed him around that one day, we stood in the middle of that street and we cried on each other. Because he said, this is not what I fought for. I can't believe my country is doing this. So it was a lot of Common Ground was a cornucopia of a lot of different people. You know, that situation educated people, you know, to how this government really operates. And with that, man, young people, stay inspired. I know it's hard and it's fucked up out here. You know, I know you face abandonment and betrayal, and my generation didn't do the best job in the world of educating you and preparing you for what you're going through. But in spite of that, remember this. We survived 400 years of cattle slavery. And our families were tight when it wasn't being broken apart. We can survive this too. And just because you're young, the most popular, most beautiful movements in our history come from the youth. So remember that. And with that, I'd like to thank you for viewing the People's Dinner Party. And if you like what you see, please hit like and subscribe. And I love you. And Seth, I love you too, man. And thank you so very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Peace out, everybody. Love you. All right, bud.
We started to publish in 1979, 1980 as a response to the emergence of the sort of rightward consensus in the United States that existed for a number of years. Response to Ronald Reagan, a response to the conservative trend. And it was a political comic book. It was a collective that was started by myself, Peter Cooper, and a German conceptual artist named Christoph Kahlhofer. And it has continued to this day, putting out magazines and also contributing in other forms, doing art shows, doing street art for protests. And we've sort of always tried to stick very close to the ground, very much try to have artists be involved in the situations they're writing and drawing about. So we do a lot of agitprop sort of work. And we sort of try to, break down the barrier between, artist and subject matter. A long list of people who are out there doing stuff who started with World War III Illustrated, so I'm pretty happy about that. And there are new people coming along, doing more exciting stuff, and I'm quite happy about this magazine.
Now everybody, have you heard? If you're in the game, then the stroke's the word. Don't take no rhythm, don't take no style. Got a thirst for killing, grab your body. Woo! Put your right hand out, give a firm handshake. Talk to me about that one big break. Spread the ear pollution both far and wide. Keep your contributions by your side. And Subman could be a winner, boy, and move quite well. Subman, you got your number down. keep it